Betting, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Bet with the Best podcast. Its mission is to explore better ways to bet on races, to seek out new, successful players, and to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. Welcome to the inaugural Bet with the Best podcast. In this podcast, we are going to be focused all around betting. We won't be giving out any picks. We won't spend much time on handicapping. We're really going to be focused in on the betting side of the game. And I can't think of a better guest to have than the person we have on today. Not only has he been a long-time successful horse player, he's also a successful contest player. He's won the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. He's also a successful owner and breeder. I think he's owned and bred some graded stakes winners. And not only that, last but not least, he actually teaches a class about betting on horse racing. I think he calls it something like the efficiency of betting markets, but he teaches it at the university where he's the chair of the economics department. I want to welcome my good friend, Marshall Gramm, to the first Bet with the Best podcast. Hello, Marshall.
Hey, Chris, thanks again for having me on for the inaugural podcast. Super excited about what you're doing. I think that a lot of our focus is in terms of things that you read, books, podcasts are about how to handicap, how to pick winners, and not enough is focused on value in betting. And in many ways, I think more and more the betting part of it, how you bet a race, how you approach a race, how you attack a race is much more important than the horses that you choose.
Absolutely agree with you, Marshall. Hopefully this will fill a little bit of that void. So I want to first just let the listeners get to know you a little bit. You know, how did the son of a senator from Texas get so heavily involved in the racing game?
Well, we moved to D.C. My dad was a college professor. My dad was an economics professor, so I'm from a line of economics professors. Both my parents are economics professors. I'm an economics professor at Rhodes College. My wife also teaches economics. So we moved in 1978. I was 5 to Washington, D.C., and I just, was a little kid, was obsessed with sports, read the sports page and noticed that there were 2 pages with charts and articles on horse racing. Horse racing was big in the DC area. Andy Beyer was one of the sports writers that covered horse racing. And so Andy is not only, a founder of the Beyer Speed Figures and has written the, three of the most important books on handicapping. He's also a fabulous writer. So, I started reading him and wanted to learn more about horse racing. And basically, in junior high school, got really interested. Started going to the convenience store, the drugstore to buy the $2 daily racing form. Just kind of tried to come up with my own systems, and at that point, just started following racing. And once I got my job at Rhodes College, had more disposable income. We started to have the rise of simulcast betting. I got a UBet account and started betting the races. And so that's kind of no one in my family was interested in horse racing. They all initially thought I was a little bit crazy and obsessed, and that it would be something that would go away. And it kind of never did. It kind of stuck with me. And now I'm not even sure they still understand. I took my parents, my dad's now nearly 81, and I took them to Oaklawn for the Rebel, and they were just shocked to see, 40,000 people at the races, and a lot of people who we sort of met with were as obsessed as I was.
They were right. You were obsessed, in a good way, though. So that's an interesting story. That the fact that you didn't really have a family member get you involved, you sort of got involved on your own.
Yeah, I mean, it was all the numbers, right? I was a numbers kid, and a lot of kids get into baseball because of the statistics. But I always thought baseball was sort of an inherently uninteresting sport, especially back then. I have more appreciation for baseball now, and so I gravitated towards horse racing. And you could, in a way, you could be an active participant. You own that horse, right, for the minute 12 seconds it was running around the track. And so, I thought it was great. I remember going to the racetrack for the first time. Went to Pimlico. I guess I had my driver's license. My brother and I went to Pimlico to bet a horse named Quail Ridge Swaps. So that was, I remember that being the first horse that I bet, and I've always been a little bit obsessed about, you know, once I got more involved, I've always been a little bit obsessed about keeping good records, I've sort of kept track of pretty much every bet I've ever made on horse races.
Well, that's interesting because I'll wait a little bit, but I want to talk about record keeping. So I'm glad you brought that up. In terms of the what you mentioned about, kind of the numbers and the analytical part of the game drew you in. I really think that's true of many players. It really is a thinking person's sport in terms of the betting side. And I just doesn't seem like racing recognizes that and sees that as a marketing opportunity. They seem to be marketing to exactly the opposite demographic typically. You have any comment on that, or do you agree with me or disagree in that regard?
No, I agree with you. I mean, I do think that, look, going to the races and having a few cocktails, I mean, that's fun. That's great. But I think that, as far as horse players are concerned, this is, these are puzzles, and we're trying to solve these puzzles and find winners and find value. And I do think that would be a way to market the sport. I think especially to younger, more analytically inclined people, who were drawn to maybe poker a decade ago, who are drawn now to sports betting. Horse racing offers a lot of action, right? There are, multiple races, multiple tracks running a day. Races are over real quickly, so there's a lot of information there. And again, the key thing is these are quick outcomes. We see a race, it's over, we can move on to the next race. You bet sports. I mean, it's like getting your teeth pulled, right? I was just thinking about the UCLA Gonzaga game yesterday, right? The back and forth and 2.5 hours of having a bet online. So I haven't been drawn into sports betting. It's something, I think about it a lot, but I just don't do it. I'm kind of a one, kind of a
one trick pony.
Yeah, one trick pony, right? I bet the horses, and that's kind of it. I have enough ADWs. I don't need to start adding sports wagering accounts.
All right, so let's talk a little bit. I don't want to spend a lot of time in handicapping, but I do want to at least know sort of what your approach is, and from the handicapping side, so that we can put your betting into that context. So, what are the tools that you use? Are you focused on, speed, figures, pace, trip, trainers, stats? Do you have a computer model? What are you looking for when you're trying to figure out what you want to bet?
I'm pretty much a generalist. So, I mean, I have, I use DRF Formulator. I think it's a great resource. I put a lot of my own stuff into Formulator. I have a model of pace that I look at. I think pace is very important when I start. I teach this economics of racetrack wagering markets class, which you talked about already. And one of the first things we do is we model pace and, look at, the potential pace of a race and what pace does to potential outcomes. I'm a speed figure guy. And I think that, again, the speed, Andy Byer's my hero, and he's the sort of, the godfather of speed figures. And then, breeding, trainer intent, those are things I also tend to focus a lot on. I'm somewhat of a specialist. I like dirt racing. I really even prefer dirt routes. I will bet turf races, especially allowance and stakes races. But again, I tend to have a very narrow focus on my approach as far as, handicapping wise and what races I tend to approach. But I would say I'm a generalist.
So on the race you target, so you target typically, I heard you say dirt routes. Is that kind of where you like to focus?
Yeah, that would be my bread and butter. I mean, I think that I like dirt routes, especially dirt route stakes races. I'm not a professional player, right? I'm a college professor, teach at Rhodes College, and so I generally a weekend warrior. And obviously, I think that the problem for sort of anyone betting nowadays is that the Saturdays tend to be the best day by some margin, and the rest of the week is really dropped off. So I like the stakes races. I like allowance races. I like dirt route races. I will, but I will keep track of the major divisions and will bet, turf stakes races. If I like a turf race, I will bet it. But I do feel that sort of my general approach to handicapping is going to matter more in dirt races. And part of it is that, our speed figures, I think, matter more in dirt races. They're much more accurate in dirt races. The timing of races is more accurate in dirt races. I can watch a dirt race and I understand what's going on. If you watch a turf race, a lot of situations, you watch a turf race, the timing is inaccurate. And if you press pause as they turn for home, you might have no idea who's going to win, right? In a dirt race, given the accuracy of the times and given the way the pace is going, you can press pause and you have a pretty clear idea of how the race is going to finish out. So that tends to be my approach. I don't watch a lot of races. In part, I just don't have the time to do that. I would love to do more of that. I just don't have the time to do that. So I think that lends itself a little bit more to, again, the sort of dirt allowance and stakes races.
Yeah, I know we've had this discussion before, and I always find it kind of amusing because the reasons why you don't like a turf race are exactly why I do like, targeting those turf routes, just because they are more chaotic and unpredictable. So it just shows you there are so many different ways to approach the game, and I'm sure we're going to find that out on these podcasts as we talk to more guests. There's a lot of different ways to go after it, and so.
I think another interesting thing with that is that, like, I don't necessarily, unless I really like, a longer shot, I don't necessarily look for chaotic races. A race that looks too confusing, has too big of a field, I might ignore. I'm willing to play a 6 or 7 horse field if I feel strongly about how that outcome might be. And I'm very willing to eat chalk. I tend to be a person that tends to play a lot of chalk. I'm not one to really find a long shot to win a race. That's not my style.
Yeah, you're kind of looking to try to reduce variance to some degree, it sounds like, as opposed to trying to seek out the high variance kinds of plays.
Yeah, there's a lot of the bigger fields create a lot of noise, right? And so if it's a 6 or 7 horse field, and if it's a 6 or 7 horse field with fairly clear pace dynamics, your horse is more likely to get the right kind of trip. Whereas in a 12 to 14 horse field, your horse is more likely to run into problems. So you might be correct and still lose. Now, the alternative is you are going to get paid, but I'm not even sure how efficient these races are getting bet. I don't know that there's as much of a bias as there used to be, that the additional field size really contributes to significantly larger payouts relative to a horse's probability. So I don't know. Those are that's debatable stuff, and it's stuff I think about a lot. But I'm willing to play a 6 or 7 horse field, and again, everything preferred. I'd love a bigger field. Don't get me wrong, but again, there is reduced variance in that case.
So you like to target dirt routes, or at least dirt races, it sounds like, and you're not afraid to lean on a favorite or play a race with a small field. So what sort of pools are you targeting? Are you a vertical player? Are you a horizontal player? If so, or if both, what pools do you target? Is it a win exacta, or you go for more exotics on the vertical side, or you're like a doubles player on the horizontals, or you play more exotics? I mean, what kind of pools do you go after typically?
Yeah, I have really, in my evolution, I've really much more moved towards being a win exacta player. I play, if I like a horse, I bet it to win, especially when I'm not playing as well. I just go back to the old pick one, right? Trying to find a winner, especially when you're struggling, can be really tough, right? Sometimes you can look at the race and say, oh my gosh, these are 7, 8 horse fields. How can I possibly come up with a try when it's hard enough to come up with just the winner? So when I'm struggling, I just focus on let's find winners, and then let's wait for the winners that we can get home at the right prices. So I like win bets. I like exactas. Again, and this is something that's changed over time. If you looked at, it's kind of looking at my numbers historically. In 2017, about half my wagers were multi-race wagers, like pick threes, pick fours, pick fives, and only 21% were win bets, and 11% exactas, and 5% tries. Now I'm about 50% win bets. I'm a 33% exactas, 15% tries. I only bet 5% in multis. And so generally when I'm playing multi-race exotics, pick threes, pick fours, pick fives, I really like most of the horses in a sequence. And so I'll play it in situations where I like, 4 of the 5 legs in the pick 5. And I play relatively small, right? I used to, basically carve out a portion of my betting to bet the pick 5 daily at a place like Oaklawn. And now I only do so if I really like the sequence, if it's something that I really love. And so that's kind of how I evolved. And again, I don't mind if I like a horse, and it's 5-2 and I can bet it to win, I'll just fire away to win bet. And the other thing is I'll play straight tries, exactly as I've even played straight supers, right? In the Pacific Classic, I was looking at the Pacific Classic in 2022, Flatlines won the 5, right? So how do you make a bet out of that? Well, I ended up playing a superfecta, Flightline over Country Grammar over Royal Ship and Express Train in 3rd and 4th, right? So that's basically a 1x1 by 2x2 superfecta. Well, the super paid 13-1, the trifecta paid 6-1. And so, I basically turned, I think, a fairly obvious outcome, right? Because Flightline was the obvious winner, right? And the 1-5 reflected it. Country Grammar was a very short price. And I've always been very high on that horse, especially going a route of ground. And then the 2 other logical runners, right? So you basically toss the other 2. So that's in a 6-horse field. And you're getting the way I basically made it 1x1 by 2x2, 6-1 in the super and 5-2 in the try. And so, making something out of nothing. I enjoy trying to make something out of nothing, right? So, many people will look at the superfecta, pay like $1.41 for 10 cents, right? But if you have it, for $100, that's $1,400. So
that I call that spinning straw into gold. And to me, that's what you're doing there. You're taking, the winner really there's no value, and you're trying to come up with a ticket structure that enables you to produce some value out of that. That's something I'm terrible at, but it sounds like that's in your wheelhouse.
Well, I think it's a lot of fun, especially on days, there'll be days where it's like, where I'm on the track live at Saratoga. I'm there, and they're off the turf, and they're a bunch of 5- and 6-horse fields. And I think, well, let's try to figure out a creative way to bet this race. Well, a 6-horse field is typically not interesting. Is not interesting, but you turn that into a superfecta, you have 6x5 x 4x 3 combinations, right? So there are a number of combinations out there. And if you can get rid of most of those combinations, or even with smaller fields, people tend to overly spread, that you can narrow it down and make bets and turn, in this case, a 1-5 over 7-2 into, a 16-1 or 13-1 or whatever it might be. So yeah, I'll look to do that. I'll look for logical outcomes. I mean, sometimes when I approach a race, I'll look for, trying to get a price horse underneath, but I'm not above, looking for just a logical outcome, if that's what I think the pace scenario and the talent levels of the horses might dictate.
Oh, good. I'm going to give you the nickname Rumpelstiltskin. You can spin straw into gold. So, I would kind of characterize what you do then. You're kind of an inside-out bettor. You focus on the win. If you see a really good exacta play, you'll may play that. If you think, if maybe you even build it out to the try or super, if you have a strong opinion beyond just the winner. And the same on the multi-race bets. You're just going to bet to win, but maybe you play a double or a pick 3 or pick 4 if you feel like you have strong opinions in those other legs. But you're really kind of win-centric, and you build out from there. Would that be a good description?
That's probably right. When I'm looking at a race and I find a horse I really like to win, sometimes I will play the exacta and try to multiply my winnings, right? So, if I like a horse that's 3-1 and that's the horse that I like, I'm going to bet it, and that'll be a majority of my bets. And then I'll play maybe a smaller exacta, getting rid of some, getting rid of some other horses and hoping to get a bigger payout as a result of being a little bit more narrow. But I'm going to, again, focus on the key. I don't want to, if I have a 3-to-1 horse I like, or, even better, if I have an 8-to-1 horse I like, I don't want to screw it up by, keying the horse in the pick 3 or pick 5 and losing, or keying the horse on top in the try and losing, right? There's nothing worse than hearing from bettors, well, I had an 8-to-1 key and it won, but I missed the pick 5, right? Well, if you're an 8-to-5 key, you should be betting that 8-to-1 key. You should be betting that 8-to-1 horse in a much larger denomination than you would be approaching the pick 5 itself, right? So, I mean, there are other scenarios too. If I do like a horse underneath, if I do like a long shot 20 or 30-to-1, I'll structure tickets to try to get that horse on the board. So, there are situations where I do, like maybe a clunk up closer at 30-to-1, or a horse that's a speed horse that I think is going to hold on, and then I'll basically try to structure my ticket to get that horse to hit the board. I can think of a couple examples, like in the 2019 Belmont Stakes. I sort of centered my play around getting Jovia on the board. So he was, 30-to-1 and kind of going to be even longer in the exotics because he looked like a no-hope horse, but he was a lone speed in the race. And there was also gold rail that day that became more and more evident as the races went on. And it looked like he was going to break and be on the lead, and, he might be able to hold on to third. And I literally just keyed him in third. And so I keyed him in third. I used Tacitus in first and second place and kind of spread in the spread where Tacitus wasn't. And I was right for 20 yards. Right, because Jovia led almost all the way around the track and then was passed by Sir Winston and then Tacitus right under the wire. And then just past the wire, Master Fencer passed him. So for 20 yards, I was correct, right? And so, but that didn't matter. I mean, it paid $622.50 and I had it for $20, right? So I got 24 grand back. So, so I will create a bet like that, just keying a horse in a position. In this case, I was very narrow in terms of I wanted Joey to finish third. It can, that can be as frustrating as, getting 4 or 5 on the pick 5 if the horse, finishes second or the horse finishes fourth, or the horse wins at 30-to-1, then you lose. But, again, you can make a smaller bet and hope to make a big score in this case.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, on your win bets, is there a kind of, what are the odds that you're looking for? Do you kind of have a typical range that you're playing in? What's the most common kind of bet? Are you playing, how low you go in terms of price, and, how high does it get? I mean, what kind of range are we talking about there?
I will go even money 4-to-5. At 4-to-5, it's rare, but I will take 4-to-5 if I really love a horse and think it can't lose. I'll take even money. I'll take 6-to-5. I would, I would love to get 4 or 5, 6-to-1. It all depends on relative probabilities, right? So, if I think a horse should be 2-to-1, right, have at least a 1 in 3 chance of winning, and it's 4-to-1, I mean, that's going to be a bet for me. If I think a horse is nearly a cinch and it's 4-to-5 or even money, that's a big bet for me, right? So it really depends on, I don't make odds lines, but at least I'm thinking about it in my head. It really depends on what odds I'm getting versus what I think the horse's chances are. So, I play a lot of 3-to-1, 4-to-1 shots, 7-to-2 shots. I am much more of an old school grinded out player. I'm not a bet a little to win the lot in general, which is kind of less fun, right? Because I don't have that many great scores to talk about. If you sort of, hey, I bet $1,000 on this 5-to-2 shot. How exciting is that to talk about? Versus hitting a nice pick 5 or something like that. And so I tend to grind it out. I tend to be, I tend to be in part what racetracks are looking for, right? So the players who bet a little to make a lot, they're not churning a ton of money, and a win better tends to churn a lot of money because when they hit, they tend to recycle that money. They tend to hit a lot. And but they tend to also bet a lot. They tend to make bigger sized bets, right? As opposed to playing a $50 pick 5, I may bet $200 on three of those races to win. So that's the one thing I've kind of had hoped tracks would really move towards lower denomination win bets. Because I think, especially for casual players and newcomers, it's the simplest way to bet. I think there are a lot of pitfalls with more complicated either multi-race wagers or single race exotics, right? So again, it's hard enough to pick the winner of one race versus multiple races. So that's why I'm super excited about what Hawthorne's doing. I want to give them a little plug here, doing their 12% win play show wagers. It's kind of my guilty pleasure. I've been playing Hawthorne on Thursdays and Sundays when I get a chance. And again, super excited they've taken that shot. I hope some other tracks will look at it.
Yeah, and I know I talked to John that you were influential in getting that change at Hawthorne. So I want to thank you. I know I've been kind of pushing for that as well. And, I absolutely agree with you. More tracks moving to kind of reducing those core wagering takeouts would be great for the average player. Definitely.
Well, I think it's such a good starting point, right? I think if you're learning the game, you're thinking about picking horses, and, the movement from picking horses to understanding value is most simply done through the win pool. And these other wagers are just much, much more complicated. And now they're much more efficient, right? So it used to be that the tries and superfectas and pick threes, pick fours, pick fives were fairly inefficient, but the computers have taken away those inefficiencies. And so they're very tricky pools. And I think many newcomers to the game will just bleed money through them. And so, especially if they're undercapitalized. And so I think the win place is a great place to start, and returning more to the bettors from that, again, hopefully encourages people to bet to win, and let them recycle their money and learn more about the game, and then venture into the exotics as they become stronger bettors.
So let's get back to win bets or your core bet. And, it sounds like you don't bet a fixed amount. You bet a very variable amount. So how do you decide when you're going to bet more or less, and what kind of range are we talking about between your maximum bet and your minimum bet, a serious bet?
So the range is enormous, because I am totally willing to bet $2 to $5 on a race just for action. I have a hard time. I have a hard time like having the races on and not having an opinion of some sort. And I have tried to be much more disciplined about sitting on my hands. And I find that's a real struggle. I think it's especially important nowadays, again, with how efficient these markets are, if you haven't done the homework, to, not just get caught up in betting the races to bet the races. And so in races where I kind of have a half-cocked opinion, or haven't quite done the work, or, want some action, I'll bet $2 to win. I'll bet $5 to win. I'll bet a $2 exacta. If I like a horse and have done the work on a race and feel very confident about a horse, I will bet, $3 to $5 grand to win. Usually, if it's a smaller track, it'll be $1,000, and I'll try to spread into other pools. But no, if I like a horse, I'll bet $3 to $5 grand to win. I'll bet $600 exacta. So it really, that'll be kind of the range in what I do. I haven't really, outside of a sort of, contest wager where those can get a little wonky when you're trying to hit a number. I've not bet anything bigger. I think maybe the largest win bet I've ever made is probably 8 to 10 grand. I think I may have made a 10 grand win bet, but usually, again, my sort of, if I really have a strong opinion, we're talking, 3 to 5K.
So the 3 versus 5, what would make you bet 3,000 versus 5,000?
I don't. It depends on the pool,
feel?
and it depends on the pool, depends on the feel, right? And I would say the more, and that's, those bets are 5 times a year, right? And often that's 5 times a year at that number. Generally, a strong opinion would be $1,000, $1,500, right? So it's the 3 to 5K would be 5 times a year. The 8 to 10K would be, maybe you've done that twice in a decade, right? So, and it's more about, again, a little bit about comfort level. I think sort of past that, I think it for me would be uncomfortable, right? So again, typically I like a horse, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. On a good card, for example, like like the Louisiana Derby card this weekend, I'll probably bet, $2,500 to $3,000 total if I like a few horses. And so that's kind of more on average of what I do, like as a weekend warrior playing $3,000 to $5,000 total. Right. And so, if that's the case, maybe a good win bet would be $1,000. So where I'm playing 4 races and I'm making, again, one or two big bets.
So I'm just a little bit curious, so it sounds like you're kind of around $1,000 would be your typical bet when you've done the work and you like a horse, but sometimes you amp it up to say 3,000 to 5,000. Just like, what would cause you to go from that typical bet to that next level? I'm just curious. Is there any way you can characterize that, or is it just a feel thing?
I think it would be a horse that I really liked, and really, I think it's more or less a feel thing, and it's more or less, I think the horse is doing really well. I'm getting a great price. It's one that's maybe a little bit overlooked by the public, and it's something that comes around again. I'm thinking 5 times a year, right? Whereas the $1,000 bet would be, $1,000 bet would come around once every couple weeks for me, right? And so that would be, I like a horse. It's a good price. I'm getting a good price on it. I don't. It's just the level of conviction I have and the kind of odds I'm getting on a horse. And so that I don't have any. So I don't have. There's sort of no more. I don't have any sort of standard rules that I apply to myself. I'm more likely to make the bigger bet on bigger race days, right? Like a horse like Orb. I think this is going back in time, like Derby 2014. I loved Orb, so I bet $5,000 to win on Orb, right? And so on a bigger race day, the pools can absorb it. I've studied the horses more. I've probably watched the races more, and often that's a detriment, right? I mean, I think back to last year's Derby. I bet a ton of money on Derby Day. In fact, the Derby Day basically sank me for the year. And it was, in part, I'd studied that race so much. I was teaching my horse racing class. I made a 2-hour YouTube video for my students that I made public going over the race. I didn't even talk about Rich Strike because the Rich Strike didn't draw until Friday. And so, I had a couple of strong opinions. I really like Mo Donegal. And so, I got a little bit careless, and I got careless and spready. I started playing multis to try to get into the Derby and make a score. And then when I missed all those, and it was literally one of those things, I'm playing multis to get into the Derby, and I missed the first leg of the multi, so I go to the next leg and miss that. And so I basically spiral out of control and had a bad day. So on these big race days, I do tend, like all of us, I tend to look at these races more, and that tends to lead to bigger bets. But can be very detrimental, right? And last year's Derby, I would want to say that last year's Derby was an anomaly, but I mean, so was Mind That Bird and Giacomo. I mean, all those races seem like, once every 50 years kind of outcomes, and it's happened 3 times in the last 20 years. And so when Giacomo happened, I'd spent all day focusing on that race. I was a much smaller bankroll player then, that I basically said, after the race, like, screw this, I can't do this every year. And we started throwing a big Kentucky Derby party. So from 2006 until 2019, until the pandemic, we had a big Derby party every year where we'd have 200 people over. And there would be years like the Mind That Bird year. There was a big scratch that morning. I want revenge scratch. And I was all excited to bet I want revenge. Well, I didn't even bet the Derby. And thank God I didn't, because Mind That Bird won. And so now we're back to, I no longer have the Derby party. It's gone by the wayside. My kids are older. It was generally a kids party with an excuse for us to serve mint juleps. I have an industrial size ice crusher to make mint juleps. And it was an excuse, kids party, an excuse to drink mint juleps during the afternoon and watch the Derby. Well, now I don't have the Derby party anymore. And so I went back to betting the Derby in sort of an insane manner, lost a bunch of money last year. And like this year, I don't know what I'm going to do. I may have to bring back the Derby party or figure out some other distraction. because I just can't do what I did last year. It's not my whole year.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you target some of these big days that they have now? I mean, like, it seems like every track has one or two big days, like you mentioned, coming up tomorrow, the Louisiana Derby Day. Do you kind of target those, and does more of your play go into those with the bigger pools, or do you just treat those like any other cart?
No, I target those. I mean, it's not just the bigger pools. It's just that I know those horses and I've watched all their races, and those races are easy to handicap. And trainer intent, there's no, typically you don't have to be as concerned about trainer intent, right? I mean, there's no, hey, they're dropping this horse because they're trying to get rid of it, or they're dropping this horse because they're trying to get a win, or they're giving this horse a prep race, right? Generally that's not an issue. So I like the big race days. I like stakes races. I like, good allowance races. So I will, play a lot. I'll play a lot on the big race days, and sometimes those will carry my years, and sometimes those will crush my years. And so last year, I had a bad Derby day, and then I had a bad Preakness day, but I really only had a bad Preakness day because on the gambling side, I actually I had claimed the half to early voting. I claimed this filly named Caught Looking at Churchill in November of her in November. When early voting was a 2-year-old, just not having any idea who early voting was. And she ran horribly, and I won a 7-way shake on her for $50,000, and she ran horribly. And so I was just totally depressed after that, thinking, well, what are we going to do? This is going to be a disaster. And we had her entered for 30 at Oaklawn, and then we sort of caught wind that, early voting was in the withers, right? We caught wind that she was related to this, horse that was on the Derby trail. And so we scratched. Early voting won the withers. I got a nice offer for her. I turned it down and basically rode her out until the Preakness. And so in the Preakness, I liked Epicenter and I liked early voting. And so I made a big Epicenter early voting exact. I made a big win bet on Epicenter. And then if early voting won, my mare was going to be worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I had that covered the other way. So, again, it runs early voting Epicenter. I actually have a pretty bad losing day gambling wise, but I'm celebrating because we're going to sell our mare for good money, and she sold for $325 in full to Candy Ride in November. So that's something that's kind of off book, right? Off book gambling wise, but in that case I was kind of right but wrong, and I was able to hedge with my broodmare.
That's one of the more interesting hedges I've ever heard, but it was definitely a good one, and $300,000. So that's awesome. I want to get a little bit back to ticket structure for a second, because we haven't really talked about the exotics where you play like an exacta or try. It sounds like, though, you're really skinny, right? You're not spreading a bunch on these tries and supers. You're usually kind of chalky, but you're like really pinpointing your play. Is that fair to say?
Well, not necessarily. For example, if I like a horse underneath, I may spread on top, right? So it's if I like a 30-1 horse to hit the board, right? Then I've got to figure out a way to structure that ticket to make it work, right? So I may end up, having a ticket that might be like a 4x1 exacta, and then a 4x5x1 trifecta, right? If I can get that 30-1 horse underneath and the field is of decent size. And so I would say that's a little spready, but I'm looking at the race upside down, right? Instead of trying to get a horse on top and spread underneath, I'm trying to get a horse underneath and spread in the other spots, right? I think
so you're like keying one horse, and then you might spread in one or two other spots, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. So what was this? The Breeders' Cup in 2018, I like Gunnevera underneath, and he was 30-1. And so I used him in exactas with like nearly half the classic field, right? And then because at 30-1, you were going to get a really large exacta payout. And so I used him with half the field, and I narrowed it a little bit down for my tries, but I think it was like a 6x1 exacta, and then something like a 3x6x1 trifecta, right? But that was, you're getting a good number, and you were getting a good number for him to come underneath in a big field, right? Those two things were combined, because you got to be careful. A 30-1 horse in a 6-horse field doesn't mean a lot underneath versus a 30-1 horse in a 12-horse field.
All right, great. Really interesting. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. I want to hit a couple other topics. Fixed odds wagering. That seems a lot of support for trying to increase that from some people. It hasn't really gotten much traction in the United States. Is that a part of your play at all? And if so, how do you approach that differently than, say, the pari-mutuel side?
I don't. I've not gotten involved in fixed odds at all. So I'm not even quite sure how. Right. I would love the opportunity to play fixed odds of like a Betfair style. I really like the way sort of exchange wagers work. I wish that we could have an exchange wager system in the U.S. That maybe the tote companies ran. But I'm a little bit dubious of fixed odds, just in terms of the stories I've heard about winning players being sort of left out, and how it might affect our pari-mutuel ecosystem. But as of now, again, I don't play fixed odds.
All right, yeah, and I mean, to do it legally, it's kind of limited right now, depending on where you live. But I just was curious if you had, again, the fixed odds are a little bit different with the exchanges, quite a bit different actually in the way it plays out versus going against a book where the book is basically they can't make money if you are a sharp player. They're going to lose money on you, and that's the big issue I think you hinted at. How about, at some point, we went from a casual player to a more serious where you're betting thousands of dollars on a race, doing that scaling up, what sort of adjustments did you make? How did you have to change your approach, if at all, going from betting a few dollars to a lot, and kind of take us through that.
Part of it was, just my, bankroll got larger. Like, I mean, part of it was just like, as my bankroll got larger, as I guess I got, as I got promoted at work and I got more wealthy. I don't even know how to put it. I mean, that just changes, how much you can bet, right? How much you can devote to this hobby, especially if you have some success, allows you to devote more. So it really was more organic in terms of the way that my betting increased. I remember that like Medaglia d'Oro and Azeri ran at Oaklawn Park in like 2003 or 4. And so, at that point, I'm an assistant professor. I just, have a brand new UBet account. And back then, Oaklawn paid 10%, had a 10% guaranteed payout. Like they paid $220 on show bets. And so, we had these two huge favorites that you could basically, Dutch show bets and guarantee yourself a profit. And I remember doing that. And I ended up betting, I think, $4,000 total, $2,000 on each race, to where I would bet Azeri to show and bet Medaglia d'Oro to show, and then bet the other horses to show. And you basically could lock in about a 5% profit. And I remember being nervous as hell about doing that. And I don't know what the hell I was nervous about, because you basically had it locked in, but it was $4,000. And at that point, if I made a big bet, it would be $20 to $40, right? And so it's just in part evolution as a player, in part bigger bankroll. I mean, all these things just different in terms of where I am in my, where I'm in my life cycle earnings and wealth, to where I was when I, made those bets, and were nervous about them. Was nervous about basically what was a sure thing, right? So it's just funny to look back at that. I remember being nervous at the time when I made those bets, and it would, you locked in a 5% profit.
That's not gambling.
Yeah, exactly. And then I remember being like hitting click to send the bets and being like, being nervous about it. But it's different now.
So now at the level of a play that you're doing now, how much time do you spend a week on racing? You already said you're not a full-time professional, but how many hours a week are we talking about that you kind of devote to this passion of yours, let's call it?
I mean, I think about it all the time. I'll look at every race card at Oaklawn Park. In part, I'm looking at to claim horses, and then I'll go through them all to handicap. If I'm super busy, maybe I'll miss a card or two. I don't tend to look at a lot of other tracks. I will skim through Aqueduct, and I'll skim through the fairgrounds. On this weekend, I'll play Oaklawn in the fairgrounds. Tomorrow, I played Hawthorne and Oaklawn yesterday, but it depends on how busy I am. But everything I read and most everything I read and study and about is related to racing. So I tend to work on some of my sort of racing variables that I sort of build into my past performances. I tend to work on those. I tend to do some data mining and look at sort of go back and look through races. I have a pretty extensive data set of races back to 2017. And so, often I'll want to, sort of answer a question for myself and maybe I'll put it on Twitter. Like the other day, I tweeted about late money movements at different racetracks. It's sort of a question I had, and we had the data. So I went back through the data and looked at it. And even my research, even my academic research is related to betting markets. And so I'm working on a couple of papers related to horse racing. Looking at a hot hand paper, right? There's this sort of controversy or in sports whether players really go on hot streaks or whether those hot streaks are statistical by nature, right? So you may hit 10 shots in a row in a basketball game, and that statistically may be probable given a large sample of games, right? And so we're kind of looking at that for trainers and jockeys, looking at hot streaks and cold streaks. And so I try to sort of blend my research in with my horse racing itself. So I'm in a sense, I'm always looking at this stuff.
So what's the verdict? Is there really a hot hand with jockeys and trainers?
Yes, there is. It's really a hot hand and it's almost certainly a cold hand, right? To me, a hot hand is like I have a co-author working on this, and he's actually really running with it. And he's much more interested in the hot hand. But the hot hand is, you're talking about winning 2, 3, 4 races in a row, right? And that's fairly improbable, right? Just given the winning percentages that jockeys have. But the cold hand is, to me, more interesting. Like the situation a couple of falls ago where I think it was Ricardo Santana lost like 120 races in a row. And statistically, that the probability of that happening was, something like 8 sigma away from the mean, right? It was completely improbable.
You lost half the listeners right there, but that's really improbable. Let's just say that.
But what's interesting is that most jockeys' losing streaks actually are much lower than what you would expect given a large number of races, right? So if you're like a 15% jockey and you ride 1,000 races a year or 1,500 races a year, we would actually project that you would have a longer losing streak than most jockeys actually do, right? So Santana's was unusual because it was so much bigger and it was such an outlier and such a low probability of actually occurring. Whereas in most cases, most jockeys' losing streaks are fairly short, right? Given their actual percentages of winning, given the sort of comparable streak that you would get rolling a dice or flipping a coin.
That's interesting. We could pull the thread on that some more, but let's move on to some other topics I'd like to cover. One is rebates. That's a big part of the game for big players. Do you get rebates? If so, what kind of rebates are we talking about? And does that influence the kind of wagers you make or the pools you play into?
So yes, I do. And I'm in a good state for rebates. There's no source market fees in my state because there are no racetracks in my state. And so I get good rebates. I'm a high volume player. And so, I do some computer betting on the side, which helps keep up my high volume play, which helps provide me rebates and it makes me in some ways more relaxed horse player. But the one thing, and I think the important thing that rebates do for me is that they normalize my effective takeout. So my effective takeout on a superfecta or a pick 5 or a pick 3 or a double is going to be the same across all wagers. So, you run into situations where as a casual bettor, you're betting the takeout 16% to win, and it could be up to 30% in the trifecta pool, which on any given race, especially in the win pool, you get to see the odds, right? You have some at least perception of where the odds are going. So, the effect of the takeout is the higher the takeout, the fewer opportunities that there are to find good wagers, right? So I remember I was in Turkey. I don't know, maybe it's almost been a decade, but I was in Turkey and went to the racetrack. Everyone else did something else, and I wandered off to Velafente to the racetrack, and they have a 50% takeout. So what does that mean? That means every horse is 2-1 and 5-2. And so there are very few betting opportunities you can find. With a low takeout, you can see more opportunities, right? And so if you move into the trifecta pool, for example, you have no idea what the payouts are. And so if you're playing into a 30% trifecta takeout or 25% trifecta takeout, or really honestly a 20% trifecta takeout, you really can't win, especially with how efficient these markets have gotten. And I do think that if you were not getting rebates, if you were playing at the track takeout level, it's really hard to win. It's basically impossible to win because the takeout is so high. I think the only approach to winning in a consistent manner is to really sit on your hands and find, really good bets. Be very selective about the bets you make, and do so in low takeout pools. Or if you're in high takeout pools, you have to be right. You have to be right a lot. And so, even most rebate players don't win. And so the idea of betting into a 16, 20, 25% takeout, basically impossible to win.
Yeah, and I just want to make it clear, you said it normalized the takeout. What you're saying is that say there's a high takeout pool like 25% for a superfecta, your rebate's higher for that than it is into the win pool with a 15% takeout. So your net effective takeout, taking into consideration the rebates, about the same in all those pools, where a player without the rebates, they're playing, much higher takeout if they play the super than versus the win, right?
Yes, exactly. So, for example, suppose that I get, let's say my effective takeout is 10% at a racetrack. That means for a win, if the win takeout 16%, I will get a 6% rebate. If the trifecta is 30%, I'll get a 20% rebate, right? And so that way it normalizes my takeout across all wagers. And so I don't have to think as much about the takeout in any particular wager.
And so because of that, does that tempt you to dive into those higher takeout, more exotic pools because you've got that normalized takeout? Or do because it sounds like you don't play those that much.
I mean, I think initially I did, right? Because I was getting good rebates on multi-race wagers. And then I realized it doesn't matter. They could subsidize me to play the pick five and I would still lose, right? So it's not, rebates are great, but I was so bad at the pick five. And the pick five, look, it's complicated to pick the winners of 5 races. It's complicated from doing your homework and studying, you really have to study all 5 races. And, being a predominantly dirt player, you're going to have turf races involved. You may have a maiden 30, right? It may end with some state bred maiden special where you know nothing about the horses, right? And so the idea of, having the skills to bet that race and then properly structure tickets, all that involves a ton of time. And so, I found myself losing and unwilling to put in the time necessary to make myself any better. And I do think in most cases, I think a lot of players, if they go back and they look at their performances in those wagers where they struggle, is they would find that they lose significantly over what the takeout would be. So even if they were subsidized, they would lose. Look, the one thing that what Pat Cummings' research has shown is that the computers just have a field day in these more complicated wagers, in the pick five, in the superfecta, right? And so they're making these bets more efficient, and so you just can't spread your way to a profit in those wagers. You have to really kind of know what you're doing. You have to have a good assessment of each leg of these wagers.
Which kind of is a good lead into the next question, because there is one situation where everyone can benefit from lower takeout, effective takeout, and that's the carryover pools. And that's a big, there's with all these jackpot wagers where they have mandatory payouts now, and there's a lot of these carryovers. Do you chase those things? Are you targeting those at all? And if so, given everything you just said, do they tempt you despite everything you just said? Or, especially sometimes you can almost get a positive expectation bet, although it seems like that's not happening as much now because so much new money comes into the pool on those days. Just curious, how you treat those carryovers.
So I used to play them all. I used to tweet about what the effective takeout was. I used to get super excited about them, but then I quickly realized I was a fish, right? That if I were playing a carryover at some track I didn't follow, I didn't know the jockeys, I didn't know how races were typically run. I didn't know anything about the biases. And so I'd start handicapping and would end up writing spready tickets and would invariably lose. And so I don't now. I will, if it's a carryover at a track that I like, and I like the sequence, which again, has a lot. There's got to be a lot going on there, right? Because as I said last year, only 5% of my overall bets were multis. There would have to be a lot that would be correct to get me to play a carryover. And so now I don't. They just, for me, I'm not a good enough player. I'm not a good enough player to don't cover the sort of broad basis for tracks I know. A lot of tracks I follow, like Oaklawn doesn't carry over their pick 5. So they're never carryovers at Oaklawn. And so as a result of them never being carryovers, I don't really have anything to chase, right?
Yeah, it sounds like that could be a good thing. And some of the players might want to heed that. So you slipped something in earlier that was really interesting. You said you have a computer automated or assisted wagering tool that you're making bets with. It sounds almost like it's working on its own. Are you willing to share any information about that? Because my next question is going to be about computer assisted wagering. You want to describe that at all? Or
yeah, I mean, a partner and I have been computer betting for a little over a decade. It's nothing. We're nothing like the bigger teams. We're much smaller. We face the same limitations as every other horse player does in terms of 3 bets per second. I think there are a lot of, people who have sort of programming ability who would, love to sort of involve computers in their wagering. And that's all we've done. And so, we bet quite a bit more, 2015 through 2017 than we do now. The markets are just that much more efficient. And so, but that's sort of completely is an aside, right? The models come up with probabilities, and we use those probabilities to craft bets, and then we react to what the market odds are and make bets at the last possible moment. So no different than what a traditional computer team would do, but we don't have high enough volume and aren't registered such to be sort of these big official computer teams, right? So, a lot of these big teams will bet 300 million, 600 million a year. We're never that close. So, so that's sort of separate. I tend not to even look at those probabilities when I make my own bets in handicap. And so I do think that first of all, it allows me to get excellent rebates. And so I can play with good rebates for my own casual playing. And that's really, it takes a lot of pressure off my casual playing. So that's, but yeah, that's something I've been doing since 2011. And you always worry about, is this year going to be the last year? Because one thing about our game is it is constantly evolving, right? It's constantly changing. These markets are becoming more and more efficient. And I think it's easy to blame the computers, but it's not just the computers, right? A lot of our casual money has left the game, right? And that started in the 1960s with the advent of lotteries, certainly by the 90s with casinos and other forms of gambling. Now we have sports betting. So all the dumb money is leaving. There's a lot less casual money in the pools. That's made it more complicated. There are a lot fewer racetracks. Field size is declining. The number of race days are declining. And so all that has made these markets tougher. And so there's just this natural evolution to where these markets are getting more efficient and tougher. And even casual players, become, become more skilled very quickly in this game. When you and I were starting, and I don't know about your experience starting, but for me, I had to read all these books. I had to learn on my own. There wasn't sort of a vibrant community now like there is with Twitter discussing betting. There are now multiple podcasts you can listen to. There are YouTube videos you can watch. There's all sorts of resources now versus then. I think you can take, what I learned in 10 years, now someone can learn in a month. So all that is making smarter and smarter players. And so I think that's how the game has changed and become more efficient. And that's how it's become more tough for me as a computer bettor and as just a regular horse player.
So you mentioned the teams. They're a big part of the pools now, especially like you said, in some of the more exotic pools. Does that affect the way you play, knowing they're out there? Are there pools you avoid? Do you think about your play differently to try to compete with them? I'm just curious, how do you factor that into your wagering?
I try not to think about them too much. I think it is very easy to get them into your head. I try to get a good gauge on money movements, right, by watching the daily doubles. I think the double is a good predictor of where the money's going to move. It's not perfect, but if you take the daily double that closed in the race before your race and you use that to project the win prices for your upcoming race, you'll have a good idea of where the money's going to move. So I try to do that for races I'm going to bet. I try to stay away from, like I've already discussed, I try to stay away from making wagers that are very spready, right? If I don't have an opinion, I try to bet $2 to $5 on a race as opposed to degen away. I do have characteristics that would lead me to degen away, right? I'm sort of mentally, that's a challenge, but I do try to, again, be very narrow in my approach to making tickets. I like to bet in the win pool. And again, I skip a lot of races. And if I have an opinion, I will bet and bet hard. And I just try to, again, watch races and especially when I'm at the track live, I'm willing to pass, right? And so, I think that's important. You got to sit on your hands more and wait for betting opportunities. I think the important thing to understand about computers is it's not like they are, making money hands over fist in every race. They're often wrong, right? Computers have huge rebates and they're betting across many different pools and they're hoping to make, a very small profit over what they're paying in effective takeout, right? So, all the noise that computers are making could be solved by lowering rebates, right? If the fact that computers are winning and taking, 1%, 2% from general players, that could be solved by dropping takeout. The other thing they do, of course, is they make so much noise in the win in exacta pools in terms of payouts. And I just think that's something that we have to do a better job educating players on. I think explain things like imputed odds. I think, doing things that could be more helpful to players and maybe even limiting computer teams to when they can make their bets so that we don't see such dramatic odds movements. But, right now that's part of the game. And really, these teams aren't doing anything illegal, right? They're not doing anything illegal. This is part of the pari-mutuel system is that odds can change in the last click. And so they're waiting and they're making their bets at the last click. I don't quite know how we change that unless we incentivize them to bet earlier, right? Because you can't cut them out of the pool. You can't go to someone who's a winning player and say, hey, you can't bet anymore. There's no way to do that, right? Imagine if you got a tap on the shoulder, hey, you won too much, you can't bet anymore, right? We just need to change maybe their rebate structure or something so that that the price discovery happens earlier, because it's really the fact that the price discovery mechanism is right now a complete mess.
And like you said, though, there are some tools like looking at projected odds based on the doubles that can help you understand that you're likely to see an odds change in the win pool, because that discrepancy between the current win price on that horse and its expected odds based on the doubles, that's going to get corrected by those computers, right? So
yeah, it gives you a good indication where it's going to go. I think the other important thing to remember is that, like, I'm a computer player, but to some extent, no one knows about me. So like we go in through a lot of our ADWs right through the front end, right? So, we we log in with our computer and we keep hitting the website such that we stay logged in, and then we upload our bets, right? So that's not doing anything that anyone couldn't do, right? So, you can't prevent someone from using those tools to make bets. And I do think a lot of players, might make, I used to have an Excel spreadsheet I would make for pick sixes that came up with 84 different generated tickets. I had to stop using it because in part I'd upload them to ExpressBet and the 3 bets per second. If I was too late, some of them would get blocked out. But there are tools that I think that people are creating and the ADWs could focus on that might help people bet more efficiently.
Right.
And able to, basically keep up with what the computer is able to do.
Yeah, kind of level the playing field. It does seem like, but the problem is we never focus on the betting end in racing, right? It's always about the handicapping side versus giving people tools, like you said, to bet more, intelligently and effectively, and sort of give them a suite of tools and at least lets them be a little more competitive against the computers. It does seem like that's very possible. You've already gave some examples, and there are some examples out there already. All right, so let's move on. A little foreign racing. Do you bet outside the United States? If so, where and how big a part of your play is that?
No, I mean, I'll like Dubai and Saudi. I'll bet a little because it's dirt, right, and because the horses are somewhat familiar. I like watching the Melbourne Cup. I'd love to go to the Melbourne Cup sometime. I'd love to go to Ascot, but I'm not a turf guy, and I don't follow international racing. When those horses come to the U.S. and compete, I lean on other people and hear what they have to say and who they like. So I'm not watching foreign races or foreign replays. I've heard a lot about Hong Kong, and that sounds interesting, but it's not for me. I'm a U.S. dirt racing guy. That's what I like, and that's what I bet. I'm a dinosaur.
No, I wouldn't characterize you that way. All right, what you mentioned record keeping. It sounds like you really keep extensive records. What's the value you get out of that? How's that improved or informed your play?
Well, I do think part of it is you need to know what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. But I think there can be mental hurdles to it too. So, look, it's important if you're winning or not winning, and there's nothing wrong if you're not a winning player. Maybe you're just trying to lose less. Maybe you're hoping to find a big score that could make your month or year. There's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with being a losing player or having a losing year or losing couple years. We're all trying to get better at the game, but it is also, to me, it's also a source of recreation and enjoyment. If I played golf, right, I would consistently losing money because I'd be playing greens fees and such. So I just think for me, it's always been, I kind of want to know where I stand and how things are. I do think there's a mental hurdle with it though, because it used to be if I would keep track every day. And so if I had if I was losing during a day, I'd want to chase my losses and try to have winning days. So it's important for me to have a winning day versus a losing day, or have a winning week versus a losing week. And so now I try to go back and I total up everything monthly, but all of these are artificial hurdles, right? Artificial beginning to the end of the year, right? So I think of, like 2022, I had a losing year, right? And then I had a winning year, 2021, 2020, 2019, 2018, and then a losing year, 2017. So, but each of these is artificial, right? And so I don't know the best way to do it, but I think the record keeping is important. But I know for me on a day-by-day basis, it didn't work. I would chase my losses. And I'm someone, again, from the characteristics, the mental characteristics and makeup of a bettor, I have very poor tools. I'm a loss averter. Right, I don't like losing. I don't like having losing days. I would take more pleasure out of cashing at the end of the day to basically break even on a day than to start off winning and end up slightly ahead, even though the numbers would say the latter is better. So I'm a loss averter. I have a hard time walking away. I think to be a good handicapper, you need to assess your process and assess your process, assess how things went, but you don't need to dwell on it, and you don't need to you shouldn't let it affect future wagers. You have to be like a cornerback who you give up a touchdown. Again, you go back to, did you play the right? Did you do things correctly, and were you beaten because of that? And then you just sort of dust yourself off and go forward to the next play. And I have a hard time doing that. I really do. So I think it's very easy to be results oriented as well, right? You might win even though your betting was sloppy. And so I tend to, really focus on, was my process good? Did I handicap this race well? And did I make a smart bet? And again, it's still even hard to make those conclusions based upon one race where anything can happen, right? A lot of randomness, a lot of variance. And so that's I admire people who are able to make a big bet, walk away, dust themselves on, go on to make the next one, because I'm unable to do that. And I let it stick with me. I'm trying to get better at that, but I know that that's one of my personal shortcomings.
So it sounds like you're saying one of the things you try to extend the horizon longer term in terms of evaluating your performance. Sounds like that's one thing that versus like a daily or after each race kind of thing, but it does help you to reflect at some point back on what you've done and get some feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it probably meet by meet. Like, am I going to win it this year at Oaklawn? Right now, doesn't look good, but I have a month left. But I had a winning Oaklawn last year, so I'll think of it meet by meet or year by year. I'll certainly total things up for the month. It's nice now with these ADWs is they have good records for themselves, so I don't have to personally keep track of every bets like I used to. So I have, all the data from basically when I first got my UBet account to when I transitioned away from that. And so, I have all that in Excel spreadsheets. And again, I would remember I would enter that stuff daily. And if I lost $20 in a day, I would take it with me. And so, I'm trying to think about longer term horizons now.
All right. So I want to get to our bet. I know we're running out of time, so I got a couple quick questions. First of all, what do you think is the biggest mistake that most players make that if they could, correct that would have the, biggest impact on their results?
I think that, I think that players overly spread. And if they can be more narrow and be willing to lose, right? It's especially coming back from Vegas. We were both in Vegas at the NHC. You go and you watch someone play roulette, and they're trying to cover every spot on the wheel, right? I think players sometimes would rather hit than win. And so if they could just be, be more narrow in the way they bet. And I think a lot of us would, it's good to take a step back and focus on the fundamentals and see if you can be a winning win better. And then think about why you're trying to bet superfectas or bet pick fives. There's got to be some logic in terms of, especially for single race exotics, what am I hoping to accomplish by betting the superfecta? Am I looking at it because I think the race is going to collapse in a certain way? Or am I just trying to basically spread and pick up part of the pool? So again, being less spready, and again, I gear them towards the win pool. 12% takeout at Hawthorne.
There you go. I like that. And so, anything else before we get into the bet example that we haven't covered that you want to touch on?
No, I think that's good.
All right. So one of the things I'm trying to do on the podcast is have our guests, if they're willing to, walk us through a real bet that they're considering making on an upcoming race or sequence of races within the next couple of days. So I have no idea what you've come up with, Marshall, but hopefully you've got something you're going to walk us through. Tell us kind of how you arrived at this play and what you're planning to do.
Well, I want to offer the warning that this is somewhat interesting because remember, I am a win better and an exacta better, and I tend not to play multis. And so, I looked, for example, at the Louisiana Derby, and I think it was really interesting. I'd like to beat Instant Coffee. I think it's likely to have a slower pace. I think a mile and 3/16, makes it an interesting race to look at as a Derby prep because those races tend to be run more on the front. But I ultimately decided I couldn't really come up with a play because it was such a big race, a wide open field. I'm probably going to play disarm to win. But again, a lot of that depends on the prices, right? So I ended up with my play for you. I'm going to the 7th race at Oaklawn Park on Saturday. It's an optional 25, starter 16. These are fillies that I've watched quite a bit over the meet. The favorite is going to be Good Penny. I actually own Good Penny. I would love to claim her back, but she is with a friend of mine, Staten Fleury, for Cipriano Contreras. And so I can't claim her back, but I can do the next best thing. I can bet her. She's a talented filly. It is hard to find spots for her. I like dirt route. I really like dirt route fillies, and there are fewer and fewer races for dirt route fillies. And so we tend to see the same horses over and over again when you get a filly like Good Penny. This is a high price claiming / starter allowance race. She is more talented than Gianna's Gift and Big Bag Diva, who are the other horses that have been running at her level in this spot. And then the 2 starter horses, Undecoded, who I also previously owned. In fact, I claimed that horse that day that we were at Hawthorne together.
I remember that.
Yeah, she's in this race, as is Ipsum Gratis, and they've been running in, for cheaper. They ran the starter 12-5 against each other, and I don't think that race is as strong. And they were both slower on the clock, and I don't think that race is as strong. So I think Good Penny is going to be pretty clear winner of this race. She's morning line 8-5. I think she's going to go off shorter. I would bet her down to 6-5, maybe even money. I feel very confident in her chances of winning. So, that's not an interesting bet. What I am going to do is I like Right Trap to run second. So this is too small of a field to probably mess around with tries and put her in third. A 15-1 in the try at third isn't all that great. So I'm going to try to put Right Trap in second. I think she is as fast as the sort of first flight of horses as Gianna's Gift and Big Bad Diva. I think she'll be coming from off the pace. When she won the Open 20, she won it from off the pace. And then her last race, she was well beaten in the starter 30, but that was a really good field. Misty Vale is a horse that came back and won a starter and has run back numbers that are really strong. And Right Trap was actually in the back of the field and was in traffic as well. So there was the field got really spread out. Right Trap was in the back of the field, had some traffic, and then came with a fairly good sustained run. And it doesn't look at it. If you look at the running line, you see 7 by 8 lengths, 7 by 10, 7 by 8 3/4, 5 by 11, 5 by 15 1/4. But I actually did some running late to finish 5th. And I think can come and clunk up and get second. I think because this horse is trained by Kim Puhl, you'll get 10 to 15-1. And I think, again, just on the numbers, this horse is almost as fast as some of the other more highly bet horses, and is the longest shot in the morning line. It might be the longest shot in the field, again, because of the more low profile connections. And so I will make a good size 7-6 exacta, depending on, obviously depending on a lot of different things in terms of price. Now, to me, this is a starting point for maybe playing the pick 5. So in the next race, I like Debater quite a bit. So Debater is from a low profile connections, is a half to a filly named Ministry, who's really nice. And this guy, Jamie Gonzalez, trained Ministry, who's, again, this star Arkansas bred horse. This guy really exclusively has Arkansas breds. And it's the same connections, low profile jockey, 3% jockey. And in the same race, there's a Moquette, there's a Calhoun that sold for $285. And so Debater is as fast as those. He's making his second start, ran really well last time. And so, if I get 3-1, I'll take it. And that could be the core to making a pick 5, right? I like Good Penny. I like Debater. Both of them are going to be fairly short, but we've narrowed it down. Can we make a pick 5? Unfortunately, race 9, 10, and 11 look more spready, right? And especially race 11, there's an Arkansas bred race to close it out. So ultimately, I decided I can't really play the pick 5. I'm not going to get suckered in, but I do like those horses. So I'll play the 7-6 exacta, and then I'll play Debater in race 8. Maybe I'll play the double Good Penny into Debater. It all depends on the prices I'm going to get.
So to summarize, you like Good Penny to win at probably 6-5 or higher. Mm-hmm. You're going to play that exacta with, was it Rich Trap?
Right Trap. So I'm going to play the exacta with Right Trap, who's 15-1 morning line. And I think because of the connections, I'm going to get that price, even though she's decently fast. And then I'm going to play a little bit of the double or just play to win on Debater because, again, low profile connections, but this horse is fast. This horse has very nice pedigree for an Archibred. Very nice pedigree for an Archibred is actually, I said half, but it's actually full to full sister to Ministry, who won $300,000 and was second in an Open 3 other than at Churchill Downs. So
so is this like your normal kind of bet? Would this be $1,000 bet? Or
no? It depends. I wouldn't probably bet $1,000 on Archibreds second time shooter. But so I would guess right now I would bet. Depends on the odds. I'd probably bet. I'm also I've done pretty poorly at Oaklawn, and so I'm not. I don't think I'm at the sort of state of mind where I'd be willing to throw a $1,000 bet on either of these horses. I would probably right now be looking at, like, if I can get 7-2 morning line, I'd bet $400 on Debater. If I can get 6-5 on Good Penny, I probably would only bet $200 on that, and then maybe I'd play $50 to $100 exacta. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. Part of it is where I'm at with Oaklawn. Right, I've had a little bit of struggles this meet. I've seen things that have leaped out at me and have not done well. And these, in part, are manufactured plays. I knew we were doing this, and I put a lot of work into it, and they weren't super creative, but they didn't totally leap off the page. So they're mid-tier. Again, Debater at that price, I think, is a pretty good number. It still is he drew the one hole. And it is a pretty wide open race, and it's not a great spot. It's a big field. So I'm hoping that helps drift the price up, but it also increases the potential variance. So,
but this does sound like maybe not these particular horses, but this is the kind of bet this would not be an atypical play for you. You find a horse that, a 7-2 shot or a 8-5 shot that you really like, and you'll bet, and you might build out from that if there's some other opinion, either within the race or in adjacent races.
Yeah, exactly. So.
All right. Well, I know you need to get going, so I want to thank you, Marshall. As always, great conversation. I always walk away having felt better for the conversation when I get a chance to talk with you. Always learn something. You're definitely one of the most interesting people in the racing game, so I really appreciate you helping me out here in the inaugural Bet with the Best podcast. Good luck with your play and throughout the year, and I'm sure we'll run into each other again. And I want to thank all the listeners on this first show. And if you like what you hear, please let your friends know. Give us good ratings and reviews, and retweet out links so we can get some momentum going. Get more of this betting content out there. And with that, I'll leave you, and may all of you boldly go where no horse player has gone before.